I'm Mike Brown, author, nerd, and host of the Dark Poutine podcast. Join me and Morgan Knudsen, author, paranormal researcher, and host of the TV shows Paranormal 911 and Haunted Hospitals, as we take you on a journey for the curious about the unseen, the mysterious, and the incredible things happening in the world about us. Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances. When Morgan came to me with the concept of psychic addiction, I was intrigued. Can someone become addicted to psychics? Can people become hooked on what mediums, legitimate or not, are telling them? An article in the Toronto Star quoting addictions researcher Dr. James McKillop from St. Joseph's Hospital in Hamilton, Ontario, gave me some insight. In the article, McKillop says, quote, "It certainly has some parallels to the classic addictions, drug addiction, and also pathological gambling. Starting small, escalating, developing what we would consider a tolerance, and then feeling that loss of control, engaging in what feels like compulsive behavior. They can offer an almost magical way to restore a relationship. I think even more powerfully, connect with a person who was loved and has now passed away. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so exploitative." An article on the website for St. Joseph's Healthcare Hamilton intimated that, quote, "A string of negative events, including a death in the family, a divorce, and trouble with law enforcement have led a Toronto man named Jack, a pseudonym, to turn to 5 different psychics for help. After losing as much as $25,000, Jack was forced to sell his house," end quote. Some people have thrown hundreds of thousands of dollars at psychics looking for answers, a sure thing outside of themselves, to tell them what they should do next. But what will a true psychic do? Hopefully, they'll teach you how to access these things within yourself. Here's Morgan to explain more.
The beginning of 2020 began as normal, didn't it? No one, and I mean no one, expected the train wreck that seemed to follow, and no one was prepared. The emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual chaos began to take its toll on everyone as our often predictable world became tilted, spun, and smashed at our feet. Some of this was for good, some of it was for worse. No matter how one looks at what's happened, there is one thing which is really hard to deny. It has caused us to awaken. Awaken to our dreams, our fears, our realities, and most of all, our deepest questions. In our efforts to find our feet and search for answers in situations like this, the human nature is to fish for someone, something, anything to give us reasons. We search for anything to tell us that we as individuals are special and aren't actually going to hell in a handbasket. Throughout history, we have done the same thing repeatedly. The scope of fortune-telling is, in principle, identical with the practice of divination, with the central difference being that fortune-telling takes a far less religious stance. Historically, the concept grows from the Romani people and the mysticism and magic it conjured in the minds of those who failed to understand it. In the 19th and 20th centuries, concepts such as the I Ching began to infiltrate the Western culture as a means of reading fortunes and the future, though it was strictly forbidden in religious practices such as Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. All three offer strict warnings against divination and such spiritual practices. The idea of fortune-telling has taken many forms over the centuries, including tarot, cartomancy, palmistry, pendulum readings, and even phone psychics. All, of course, have been labeled as cons at one time or another, and in certain places, it's illegal to call yourself a psychic and ask for money at all. So, what are we looking for when we seek out a psychic or a fortune teller? Why is it that some individuals, and maybe it's you, spend tens of thousands of dollars on what often turns out to be scams? I'll tell you, as a paranormal researcher of nearly 20 years, this is what I've observed. The chief reason for the addiction to psychics and fortune-telling, which I've observed in people, has been a distinct lack of clarity. Now, this seems obvious at first, but let's dive into this a little further. How people finish the prompt of "I am" plays a crucial role here. I am is the creative force in the universe, and however you finish that sentence really does speak a truth over your life. We are full of I ams, but most of them aren't very affirming. And when we're talking to fortune tellers of any kind, letting them know how horrible things are is usually a high priority. Because, let's face it, most of us don't visit an oracle when things are going really well. I am confused can be turned into I am awaiting clarity. But usually our language tends to mirror negative situations. We are looking for someone to give us a reason to change our language without understanding that our language shapes our situations. Without a change in language, our situation repeats themselves like a needle on a phonograph that keeps skipping. We think we're stuck, when in fact, we're simply creating the same circumstances again and again. As life coach and spiritual teacher Iyanla Vanzant once said, "If you complain more than you bless, run for your life." Waiting for situations to change, to get happier, is a nasty trap that many fall into. They are waiting on the how, without understanding that sometimes the how is on a need-to-know basis. The universe has a way of unfolding the next steps, if you are bringing yourself into full belief that the next steps will indeed be there. But instead, people often decide to get on the phone with a paid fortune teller of various kinds, hoping that an outside party will just pass them the next steps without their own inner work. Here's the problem. The purpose is in the process. If you're constantly saying, "I'm sick of where I am," you're telling the universe you won't be able to handle the promotion. People want the promotion without the process. They're looking for the cards, the person, or the pendulum to somehow tell them that they are destined to all these amazing dreams, and all they have to do is just wait it out. But that's not how this universe operates. You find greatness when you start maximizing smallness. If you can master where you are, you get promoted to the next arena. If you're not motivated now, you're not going to get motivated when you get the dream that you want. I'm a performer, straight up. I come from a strong theatrical background, and so does my family. All of us know, through our own, often brutal experiences, that you can't be picked for the performance if you don't show up for rehearsal. It just won't happen. You must experience the process and be there for the practices. The practices aren't the fun part. We all attend these incredible shows or watch our favorite people on TV and are inspired by their performances. But we miss the hours behind the scenes when no one is clapping. The hours and hours of load-in, rehearsal, sweat, repetition, and more where there is no positive outside affirmation. Can you play without the clapping? This is a huge part of the picture that fortune tellers often won't include in their readings. The purpose is in the process. You can't sit with someone who has been in it for 30 years and expect to be treated as an equal. And if you have an attention deficit for your life, if you lack focus, you won't get picked for the recital. It's just that simple. And often, it's the reason why people will tell you, "I had this dream. The psychic told me that it could come true, but nothing happened." See, the masters, all those people that we look up to, are playing with the same energy. They're just playing at different levels. Beethoven's piano is the same piano that you can buy today. In fact, the one you can buy today is probably many steps up from anything he could ever find when the piano was first in development. It's the same instrument, roughly, but he played at a different level. He had the capacity to see beyond the instrument itself and see the potential. What you will be comes with focus, and universal energies will turn it into where you are going. When you maximize it, you can sit with the masters. The problem is, fortune tellers give us a quick fix. They tell us it's all in the cards. And somehow that gives us permission to quit making strides. We sit back and wait, hoping that those words will just come true without process. The failure to understand the energy is coupled with another deep-rooted issue, a failure to define ourselves correctly. The need to have others define us is often a root cause of how individuals become addicted to psychics and fortune-telling. So when we lose a job, a role, or a person, we lose ourselves. If we have the wrong people around us as a social group, we can lose ourselves there as well. Many times, the callers have a secret longing as they seek a new identity. Will I be married? Will I have a new job? What is meant for my life? Will I ever be happy? Well, will you? Can you take what you have developed and mastered and make it fit with a greater picture? Have you made that decision, or are you dependent on the fickle crowd to tell you what you will be doing with the rest of your life? A fun reading here and there can be great entertainment. The danger comes when people begin to turn to this medium over and over, seeking guidance and negating the wisdom of their inner self, their own personal work, and for those who hold spiritual or religious beliefs, what non-physical energy actually has in store. The fix of momentarily feeling a little bit better becomes a relief from anxiety that, without examination, will just begin to build again. This, in turn, sends the individual right back to square one and lands them back at the psychic's door, handing over more money that they don't often have to give. I often say that a true healer, if they are worth their salt, will empower their client to do the work for themselves. They have a long-standing formula of, I'll do this for you. Now, let me show you how I did it. Therein lies the true nature of the master. And when you know you've got something worth their salt, this is always present. The depth of the purpose without process problem is something we can observe less in the field of parapsychology and more obviously in the realm of ghost hunters or hobbyists. A lack of patience and focus for the process of science, learning, and fact collecting becomes terribly blatant in the hunt for the best evidence or the most shocking find. But this rings true for our current culture as well. Instant everything. We don't get immediate gratification, we lose focus, and we give up. It's an extremely immature way of viewing ourselves, the world, and others, but it has become far more prevalent as the means of getting what we want instantly become more available. And we want people around us to affirm that those things that require process must be instant as well. They must be a sure thing, and on a sure and steady path, and it must all be guaranteed to us. This faulty thinking runs us into big trouble when we don't put in the work to do what we need to do in the rehearsal, and then, when it comes time to show up for the recital, the person who understands the deeper purpose because they showed up gets the job in the end, leaving us to blame the reader, blame the employer, blame God, or blame others for simply just not getting it right. After all, it was in the cards, right? There's also a bit of a false premise to the idea that future is something that actually hasn't happened yet. Time and the idea of linear time with a set pace can be viewed as a simply human construct. Through quantum and particle science, we have since come to understand that there is actually no future, but rather a series of moments all happening in the now. So the past is now, the future is now, and when we get to said future, it's only happening now. Jesse Elder, a popular philosopher, gave a very memorable example using the idea that our reality is actually a series of probabilities, like a house with millions of rooms. As we focus, those rooms begin to collapse. All those probabilities begin to narrow until we are all left standing in one room, the probability we have focused into our experience. Fortune tellers and psychics do indeed have a say on these probabilities. If we truly believe what someone tells us will happen, truly will happen. Just in the same way that we can focus a curse into existence, we can also focus a suggested probability into existence as well. Once it's suggested, it is now in the realm of possible manifestations. In an essay published in 1824, a philosophical essay on probabilities, Pierre-Simon Laplace introduced a notorious hypothetical notion. A vast intelligence that knew the complete physical state of the present universe. Dubbed Laplace's demon by the readers and colleagues, there would be no mystery about what had happened in the past or what would happen at any time in the future. This brand new and imagined intelligence would be the universe itself, reflecting ideas of, not a thought experiment. Ordinary physical theories tell you what a system is and how it evolves, and quantum mechanics does this as well. But it also comes with an entirely new set of rules. It governs what happens when systems are observed or measured. However, measurement outcomes cannot be predicted with perfect accuracy. We can only calculate the probability of getting a certain outcome, leading to something called the Born rule. The wave function assigns an amplitude to each measurement outcome, and the probability of getting that result is equal to the amplitude squared. So then, what is a probability? There are two categories on the surface, objective or physical. Think of a coin toss, but there are also subjective and evidential views that take into account people's perspective, filters, and belief systems. quantum mechanics, as it is currently understood, doesn't really help us choose between competing conceptions of probability, because ultimately, you can't find a formula in quantum physics for all of them. In the end, we can look at it this way, as a way of self-locating uncertainty. All we must do is consider the set of all possible worlds, all the different versions of reality one could possibly conceive. In other words, all the rooms in the house. In some ways, the role of probability as expressing our personal preferences and desires about which of these possible worlds is the actual one. Now, we're in the realm of exploring new universes, new realities, and choice-making, rather than simply flipping a coin. So, what does this all mean? It means good news and bad news. The good news, you get to choose. The bad news, well, you get to choose. It's not the prospect many people want, even though they think they do. This concept comes with something profound and rare: responsibility. Without the crutch of having someone to tell us that we have no choice, our future is pre-written, it means that the only one who can take ownership is us. We are forced to iron out what we really want, what we don't want, and how we can co-create our reality moving forward. Unfortunately, the last piece of advice one often gets from a corner store psychic or fortune teller is, you create your reality. You get to choose, and the universe will support you, dream with you, encourage you, rally behind you, and blow your mind in the process. So, let's tell our own fortune. I'll give you a hint. It's even better than your cards will tell you.
Our guest for this episode is no slouch. Dr. Callum Cooper is a chartered psychologist with the British Psychological Society, BPS, and a fellow of the Higher Education Academy, HEA, holding postgraduate degrees in psychology, social science research methods, and education from the University of Northampton, Sheffield Hallam University, and Manchester Metropolitan University. He has a long-time association with the University of Northampton and is based there as a senior lecturer in psychology, delivering classes and conducting research on death and bereavement, positive psychology, human sexual behavior, parapsychology, and research methods. He is a member of organizations such as the Society for Psychical Research, sitting on its council, and the Survival Research Committee, a professional member of the Parapsychological Association, a Hope Studies research affiliate, University of Alberta, and of the research groups Health, Education, and Behavior Change, and Exceptional Experiences and Consciousness Studies, EECS, at the University of Northampton. Callum is also on the Scientific Advisory Board for the Forever Family Foundation and for the Winbridge Research Center. So when I first read that biography, I thought, oh no, we are in for a real academically dry conversation. Boy, was I wrong. I was pleasantly surprised to find that Dr. Cooper, Cal, is an engaging, funny, and interesting presenter. The time we spent with him just flew by. Anyway, here's the conversation that we had.
So I am really, really happy today, as one of my dear friends is here, Dr. Cal Cooper. And there's so much on the table that I've learned from you, and I know so much that the people listening are going to learn from you as well, because you're such a wealth of amazing information and research. And one of the things that I love about what you study is positive psychology. And it is something I think that is so needed right now in both the world of parapsychology and just the world in general because of where we are with things. What was the moment for you when you realized, or was it a moment, when you realized that positive psychology and parapsychology blended together a little bit?
Well, as an undergraduate, I'd done a module, a third-year module called Motivation and Emotion. And it was led by a gentleman called Dr. Graham Smith. And he was the very kind of figure of positive psychology that you could imagine. If you picture what a positive psychologist was like, he was definitely it. He oozed positivity. He made you feel good about anything and everything. It doesn't matter what kind of grade that you came out with. He would talk to you about all the positives of your assignment and how even the bad bits actually had some positives in, just needed to be looked at in a different way. He was really good at just not putting people on a downer, and to actually turn any kind of situation that some people might see as a negative into a positive. And so I really enjoyed his company and his lectures, and I did a lot of volunteering work as an undergraduate for high school students coming in trying to get a university experience for the day. And Graham was leading on those things. And so we'd also put some positive psychology in there. But it wasn't until a few years later that I decided to go back to Northampton to pursue a PhD. That I kind of got a loose idea that I wanted to look at apparitional experiences. Ghosts and hauntings had always been my interest. So certainly something around spontaneous apparitional experiences. And then it started to overlap with, well, what about those specifically around the time of bereavement or perhaps bed visions? And so it was starting to get a spin of the health aspects were starting to come out of this, rather than looking at the evidentiality of these claims. You know, what objective nature might they have? What about the messages received? What about multiple witnesses seeing them? I needed to create more strings to the bow, really, so that the PhD, once it was done, you know, it could be used for a number of things. You want the qualification, the thesis, to actually have practical applications instead of just making scientific discoveries. So I went back to Graham's office, had a catch up with him. I'd already decided I wanted him to be on the supervisory team for my PhD. And I just said to him, look, it'd be great if we could have a positive psychology spin in all of this. What do you recommend? And so I'd already told him the premise of what I got so far. And all I remember from that conversation was him sat in his chair, sitting back a little bit, probably putting two fingers together near to his lips and having one of those thinking moments. And he just looked at me and said, look at hope. And that was it. That's all I remember from that conversation.
Wow.
And so I went away and I started reading, I think it was Snyder's book, which is just called The Psychology of Hope, which came out in 1994. That was the starting point for me exploring how that fits into people's everyday experiences, anomalous experiences.
Gave me goosebumps when you when you said look at hope, because it is just Mike, you probably were on the same page with that as well.
I totally was, yeah.
Yeah, and it just gives me goosebumps, because I think it is an area of this that people just don't realize that so much of parapsychology is really, it can really connect you with that. And, you know, I know you deal with a lot of students and whatnot, and people that are going through the journey of understanding these concepts like death and bereavement and things like that. What are some of the biases or beliefs that you run into amongst a lot of these people, students and adults?
If we're just on the health side of things, how these experiences might benefit people, not very many. There's still a common assumption, and something that we always have to throw very hard towards the ethics committee if I'm getting a student to look at these similar experiences, either the spontaneous ones or people visiting mediums, and what benefit they felt from those two experiences that for them suggested this interaction with the dead. And an ethics reviewer that may be a psychologist but not familiar with this literature may have the assumption that, well, it's probably not best to draw up these kinds of memories because these are very negative experiences. When on the contrary, when you actually look at all the data from research that has been done on these experiences, they're extremely positive for people to have them. In fact, it's round about 2-3% of survey cases in general that will find that someone had a negative reaction. And even then, when you target those cases and ask those people, well, what happened in your case? It was usually, well, it initially scared me because, you know, I looked up and saw my uncle stood in the room and he died the day before. So it really took me back. Okay, well, how did you feel a week later thinking back on it? Well, actually, I saw it as a good thing. Well, so they're talking about the initial reaction being scary, or they saw them in a blooded state, or, you know, they died of something like, say, cancer, and it really started to withdraw their physical features away, and they looked like that as the apparition, which is very rare. But maybe those are the reasons why some people saw it as a negative, because it was more about the instant surprise or the condition of the apparition rather than, well, what does this actual reconnection mean for you in terms of, you know, their potential continued existence or how you thought about life and death. So there might be those misconceptions that they're scary or they're harmful for people when actually, you know, we survey them, they're they're largely very helpful for people. And some people not sure, but it takes time to consider them or speak to an expert about them and to highlight this research or point them in the direction of literature they can read for themselves to compare their experiences to others, which might also help them as well. On the other side, if we're just testing and exploring, well, what evidence is there for people seeing ghosts, that can result in many other kinds of negative reactions where we still see a lot of unusual biases that could be religious based, cultural based, people's educational backgrounds, especially if they've gone through basic schooling, but they had teachers that were very materialist in their way of thinking, and they didn't know anything about parapsychology or various sciences that you really don't get to dabble with until you hit university and become aware of them and know how to get access to that kind of literature. But for one example, I was at a house party once where someone asked me what I did for a living, and I think very carefully sometimes as to whether I say I'm a psychologist, in which case they usually leave me alone, because some people just don't want to talk to the psychologist, thinking that they're analyzing them or looking down on them in some way, trying to figure them out, treat everyone like a pet experiment, or parapsychologist. And either they know what that is and have a load of assumptions, or they don't know, so you explain from scratch, or they have a sort of idea. And in which case, sometimes you can get actually a very pleasant and interesting conversation. But on this occasion, this guy asked what I did, or maybe his wife did. Anyway, I said parapsychologist, and this guy just interrupted, and he said, "What? That's all ghosts and psychics, isn't it?"
Oh, no.
And I said, "Well, in a very, very crude nutshell, yes." And he said, "Well, that's nonsense. There's no evidence for any of that." And I said, "Well, that's a very large claim to make. I don't know where you've got that assumption from, but let me give you one example. I work for the University of Northampton. There alone, we store thousands upon thousands of studies within our journals that have found evidence for and against various things in very tightly controlled experiments. So if you're saying that stuff doesn't exist, I'm afraid I walk past and I touch that stuff every day. I also deal with the archive stuff. So you're more than welcome to come over and I'll buy you a coffee and you can peruse that stuff that you say doesn't exist to your heart's content." And he just got really annoyed. He said, "No one has such a job. There's no evidence for that. It's all nonsense." And he grabbed his wife's hand and he said, "That's it, we're leaving." He left within 5 minutes of talking to me. So for some people, it's a very knee-jerk, angry reaction if you're very politely conveying the information to them. And it just really rocks the cradle. It really upsets their worldview because they have nothing else to argue on.
Yeah, I totally get that because I've run into the same thing myself, and I think you're right about the worldview thing. I think that really gets to the heart of it because the way I've found it is that it always seems to disrupt a paradigm if their paradigm is very materialistic. And it seems that way for me as well because I've run into the same thing where it's either you can have a really, really great conversation and people want to tell you about things that have happened to them or whatnot, or you get this really sort of offstandish, they don't know what to do with it, so the next step is almost to get angry at it or to get frustrated with it.
Mm. And the main thing to do, I think, with that and any argument you get in day to day, the best stance you can do is just collect yourself and be as calm and polite, and don't if they're changing in tone, stay to the same tone. They expect you to also get to that tone as well.
Yes.
If you stay down at that level, there's a sort of a panic reaction in them that you've got this. You know what you're talking about with that command of your topic. You don't need to get into their situation where it seems they're starting to have to defend themselves by changing their tone of voice or the language that they use. I mean, we see this on Graham's hierarchy of argument, if either of you have ever seen that pyramid.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, I've got one student that's been looking at how psi data is discussed online in a variety of formats, from YouTube commentary sections underneath each YouTube video. I'm sure both of you have read comments people make on videos on there, and we've looked at the dialogue there.
Try not to.
Try not to, but sometimes we have, and we've compared videos between different talkers that are known for, I don't know, being very pro-psi or being very anti-psi. We've looked at Facebook dialogues and saved certain chains that were very important in terms of how the dialogue took place, and wiki talk pages as well about how certain editors would interact with each other around topics as well. And we've seen in that if an authority steps in and they calmly explain a good point of reference and why it's relevant, and they're up against someone that's trying to dominate it, but they don't know what they're talking about, then there's a number of things they resort to. Some is name calling. I've been referred to as dog a lot of times on those forums, whatever the hell that means. I guess it's derogatory to call me dog.
I've gotten evil, so I can one up that one.
They would figure out what university I was at and then think about where it was on the UK rankings. Oh, it's hardly even in, the top 12, blah, blah, blah. Or they turn to parapsychology journals and how big an impact factor have they got. Or say you can't provide any evidence for this and you provide a number of citations. They realize that they're from parapsychology journals, so they're not open access. And they say, can't you give me a web link? Well, no, because these aren't digitized. You have to pay the subscription. Otherwise, they just wouldn't exist because the editor has to be paid. They're very small time journals, but it's very honest research that's subscribed to by a lot of people who pay their membership.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of swings and roundabouts there, and it doesn't matter what kind of thing you put in place sometimes in your argument. Sometimes you get these very petty responses of name calling, being derogatory towards institutes or the journals, finding anything and everything to say besides, well, let's just focus on this one paper and talk through the methods you say are crap.
So clearly it's something, the reaction, this strong reaction, is you're threatening some sort of belief in those people. What do you think that is? What do you think is the root of that?
Well, some people, I think it was Dean Radin, there were certainly a few other people, possibly Brian Josephson, referred to it as a psychology of disbelief. You get some people that are on one extreme end of the scale where they're absolute psychology of believers, and it doesn't matter what you say about the orb they caught on the camera or the experience that they had, that you think, I've got a perfectly conventional explanation for that. They don't want to hear it. It absolutely was something unusual, unexplained, and you can never explain to me how it occurred. It just exists as an anomaly, whatever the hell that means. All anomalies are just sections of science that science hasn't properly charted yet. It doesn't permanently exist as an unexplained thing. There should be some mechanism behind it. And then on the other end of the scale is saying, well, there is no new anomaly. We already understand it all. So don't go around thinking that you're dealing with anomalies here. You're dealing with things already understood and you're in fantasy land. And so I suppose that's one end of the spectrum where you've got these sort of post-materialist beliefs, but without really any science backing or understanding of science whatsoever. And people very much in this spiritual domain, a carefree domain where they just don't want to hear about science. And then the other extreme end of the spectrum where it's very hardcore materialist perspective, but without any knowledge and willingness or interest to actually read any of the literature to the contrary. Parapsychology, well, that's fringe science. Who cares about that? We don't take any of that seriously. It's not even a proper science. That's why universities don't touch it, as a common assumption.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. With both ends of the spectrum. We were talking to Lizette Coley about something very similar to that in the last episode, and she was saying just the same thing. And of course, for the audience, she's the founder of the Parapsychology Foundation in New York, and she was echoing the exact same sentiments. And there's a lot of controversy and things like that around the use of people like psychics and whatnot to help people through the grieving process. What have you learned about that?
Oh, Lizette, she's my mama across the pond. I love her. The grieving process here for the spontaneous experiences, we've even found in textbooks by Oliver Lodge and a number of other people talking about the rise of spiritualism and early investigation, psychical researchers' attitude towards seance phenomena, and especially with his book Raymond as well, looking at his own son's demise during World War One and the amount of people as well during World War One that did lose their lives, and the amount of families that never got any kind of resolution. They never really discovered what happened to their relative and got to say goodbye. So a number of people were turning to spiritualist beliefs, attending seances, and wanting any kind of message to come forward, really, to give them that clarification that they're okay, or there is an afterlife, or find out what happened. There was even a lot of spiritualist stuff surrounding Titanic as well. I mean, Titanic's still an extremely romantic tale and true disaster, as we know. but has a lot of psychical stuff related to it in terms of the amount of premonitions that came forward. But true, it was its maiden voyage, and a lot of people had maritime superstitions about maiden voyages, and
Right.
you shouldn't take them. But someone's got to sail it first. But still, there was a lot of stuff about contact with people like W.T. Steed and people like that after it sank. But it brings about this resolution. This is what I was looking at in the first PhD, where we were looking at hope, because we looked at a number of more modern books that have been pushed out to the public about loosely what parapsychology had discovered in its surveys and individual cases, and then the authors, mainly from various academic backgrounds, but not particularly known to parapsychology, had talked about various elements, key elements that came out of certain cases. And that's why I found in some chapters they said hope as a healer, or just sections just on hope. Even if you go to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's first well-noted book from 1969 on death and dying, there is a whole chapter there that is just entitled Hope. So when we looked at the books on after-death communications and tried to find where hope was mentioned, I'd be searching the indexes, and if they didn't have that, I'd trawl through every page just looking for the word hope and in what context they're using it. And people would say, well, the experience gave me hope. And more we saw, well, none of the authors are really defining what they mean by hope, but we're seeing a lot of the experience, they're reporting that the experience gave them hope. Hope in terms of psychology is purely a form of goal attainment. You can have small hopes and you can have big hopes. At the end of the day, you could hope to sit in front of the telly, crack open a bottle of beer and chill out with a takeaway, something like that, because you've had a long, hard day. So you're already, part way into the morning, picturing that that's how you want to spend your evening once you get home. Well, wonderful. That's a very small hope. That's very achievable. Most people are able to have access to that kind of lifestyle in the evening. So what do you do? Well, it's not that simple. You've still got the day to complete. You've still got work to do. And so you've got to think about, well, what's my next task of the day? And then I've got a lunch break and stuff. So how am I going to spend this next hour or next 2 hours? It's all in little stages of, I just need to get through this bit first. And then I've got this. That's my next stopgap. That's the next marker, the next flag. And then the afternoon starts as well. And I want to make sure that I've got so many of these ticked off my list of things to be done. And these emails need answering as well. So I write down the names of these people that specifically need a response. Bit by bit, you're creating a mental path, whether you're making these notes or not, but you're making a mental path of all these flags you've got to get past to know that the day is done. I can go out, I can order or go and collect that takeaway, pick up some beers, go home. That's it. Take my coat off, whatever, wash your hands, shoes off, sit on the sofa, and then open and enjoy. It wasn't that simple as just thinking about it and then it happened. You still had to do so many things to complete the day, right, but in mind of having that biggest flag of I want that at the end of the day. And that's a small hope. The statistical chances of that happening are very, very likely. You could also have a hope of winning the lottery, though, and that becomes on the larger scale because the chances of winning the lottery are very slim, but they're going to be very, very, very slim if you don't even buy one ticket. One would have to just blow in the wind in your direction that someone's bought that day that's suddenly gone out of their hand or bag. So that's the difference between wishing and hoping, though. You could wish to win the lottery, but you're not buying tickets. Well, good for you. That's just wishing, and wish fulfillment might come about, but it's highly unlikely. If you hope, though, there's an action involved, and that action is saying, right, so I'll get up, I've got the money here, my $2 or whatever for a lottery ticket, and I'll go and get them to just do a lucky dip, random numbers come out, there we go, I've got one ticket. If you've got $4 spare, great, get 2 tickets maybe, up your chances ever so slightly, ever so slightly, but still, it's better than one ticket. And so there, you're in it to win it. But the chance is different, but there's still forms of goal attainment. How do we relate this back to the after-death communications? Well, when someone has one, when they say the experience gave me hope, it's on a kind of a grand scale of life and where life is moving forward. So we all have this mystery of death and not really knowing what lies beyond the Iron Curtain. And these experiences give us a potential glimpse of what's going on there. So I've interviewed and received accounts from people that are on every end of the educational spectrum, every end of the belief scale spectrum, and yet if they were in the right place at the right time, they seem to have one of these experiences, from dreaming of the dead to seeing them, to sensing their presence, to smelling them. And they find that these completely flip on their head sometimes some of their previous views and are really impactful. When they say, though, it gave me hope, it could be that it confirms, it makes more concrete some of their pre-existing ideas about maybe the mind lives on after death in some way. If this person came back and spoke to me and interacted with me, then surely there's some conscious awareness or some element of personality is retained after we die. So it's giving them that. At the very least, it's a win neutral situation. I don't see it as a lose. Some people have found that an unusual analogy, but it can't be a lose, because if you die and there's nothing there, you won't know about it. So a neutral situation is being dead and having no conscious awareness, and you just really wouldn't know about it. The positive side is you do become reunited, or you do live on. And that's the hope that you're getting from that kind of experience. So that's how I'm thinking that as a cognitive process, people are thinking through what this experience means to them. And so they've had their experience. That means that in life, they can just start to form goals, carry on, start living your life. Don't stay in that state of grief. It fast tracks the whole grief process.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And the more people that I've talked to over the years, it's been exactly that where, they have found that experience to really get them to live in a better way. They can sort of live their best life, as they say, and it's really an interesting transformation for a lot of the people that I've talked to as well, with psychics and people going to psychics for these experiences. We all know there's that small percentage of people who, you hear about them becoming very addicted to going back to phone psychics and things like that, where they're relying on these predictions and information and whatnot to dictate what's going on in their experience. When do you think those roles and those dynamics start to become toxic?
To be honest, there's not been, certainly mediumship's been studied very extensively by psychical research and parapsychology. And the difference between the two of those disciplines now, the line is almost blurred, because both are one and the same. Psychical research was the traditional form of collecting survey data, real world experiences, and trying to make sense of them, whereas parapsychology became the experimental side. But essentially both fields, parapsychology was more university based and trying to get psychical research established, but both disciplines are interested in survival through to ESP, but parapsychology by name more ESP and PK. But I digress. With the
That's okay.
mediumship side of things, and when people are grieving, certainly studies by people like Julie Byshaw, Rachel Evenden, and others have been looked at in terms of, again, the benefits of people going to see mediums. But we have questioned this before, that's a bit of uncharted territory in terms of how much is enough. At what point does it become addictive, to the point that it's gone past the point of helping that person? They need to now spread their own wings and move on without the medium being there. But to many people, and especially the medium, if they're, let's say they're not taking pay, this is just something that they offer, maybe as just a friend of a friend that they know or something like that, it's being seen as an alternative to bereavement counseling through a counseling psychologist or psychotherapist. Some people go to mediums in those instances because they fear the social stigma from their friends, family, colleagues, that they can't cope with grief, that they actually are starting to have a problem, and therefore you need to go and see a healthcare practitioner to help you deal with it. People don't want to be seen in that context sometimes as though it's some sort of weakness that you have to go and talk to someone. So to go to a medium, which in many instances has to be labeled as a form of public entertainment, and just, go along, see what it's like, should be interesting. People go for one-to-one readings all the way through to going to a theatre and seeing them perform on stage, or a spiritualist church. And so they prefer that entertainment side, where they can even talk to friends, have a cup of tea, coffee afterwards, chat about it, maybe go out for a meal, or go for these one-to-one sessions. But at some point, though, you have to gain something from it and say, right, okay, if they want to believe that person's with me now, I'm satisfied with what that medium said, then it's time to move on and maybe recognize day-to-day spontaneous experiences if you have them. Otherwise, it's like you're constantly paying, the phone booth for more calls to the dead, in a way, getting this direct line if they really believe they're getting it. But if they're doing that, if it is a paid service with mediums, I'd say that at some point that might become a problem if it's actually starting to get to the point where they're spending more than they can afford, or if the medium's encouraging them to go back as well, because they've got a duty of care. They should be thinking ethically about what they're doing as well. And I've known many mediums when I've spoken to them saying, I've seen someone twice about their bereavement, and the third time I said, look, you don't need to do this anymore. I've told you what you need to hear from them. And they might say they're telling you don't need to hear directly through me anymore. So there's sometimes these mediums that I've known, they've said they've had to tell the client, please, you don't need to come back.
Well, and the empowerment aspect of this, I think, is so important. I think there's been so much research that has been done, of literally people having their own experiences or being able to quiet their mind and receive messages, and people that believe they're receiving messages and things like that. And I love how there are these select groups of mediums that have been studied and whatnot that are empowering the people that they're seeing. And I love that. I love that so much.
I haven't specifically with what I do. I've got my foot in many doors with parapsychology, and I've got loads of colleagues working on the mediumship stuff. Even one of my PhD students is focusing on mediumship. But even though I'm even surrounded by some, not only SPR proceedings and things like that, I've got a fair few biographies and autobiographies of certain mediums through time that, no one ever really figured out what was going on with them. Yeah. Everyone from Eileen Garrett to Mrs. Piper, Mrs. Leonard, Alex Tannis, a number of this, even obscure names that I don't like. Here's one here. I've not even read it. Who's this? Arnold Clare. Who's he? But so someone's written a whole study on him, and there are many that came out through the Psychic Book Club and Psychic Press, where some people had followed a certain medium in the 1920s and 30s for so long they end up writing that person's biography, and sometimes extremely detailed seance room layouts in those little books. Harry Price did it with Stella Cranshaw. And so, we've got these named individuals that people tried their best to put conditions in place to rule out any kind of fraud or sensory leakage going on and various other things. Even with the Schneider brothers, Will and Rudy Schneider, Harry Price had electrified the seance circle. Rudy Schneider would be tied up in the corner of the room, arms and legs tied down to the chair, and the people were sat around the seance table, and they'd have to put on gloves and slippers, and it would complete the circuit. And if you started to take off your glove or the slipper, even if it started to loosen itself, it would light up a red light bulb in front of that sitter. And so Harry would say, could you just check your glove and tighten it again for me? And it would then close the circuit again, and the light bulb would go off. So he knew that no one was releasing their hands or feet from their position around the table. And that was an instance of physical effects going on around in the seance room. We've got all these mediums throughout time, and those are ones where they were coming out with very specific information that for people that knew those deceased individuals, they were very satisfied they were getting some direct communication. Whereas day to day, the kinds of people that you might see at the theatre in passing and things like that, you might know from, with both of you having spent so much time looking at unusual experiences, that a lot's very generic information about getting someone with lower back pain. They passed with a chest condition. I felt that towards the end they went very quickly, and some really, really generic stuff that if that person is desperate for a message, they'll see all of those as a positives and very specific. And we start to get into that realm of astrology. And,
very much.
And, we could mix up Pisces with Capricorn and stuff like that. And it's still saying, you're a very confident person on the inside, but I'm sure now and then you doubt yourself, but you've got so much hidden potential, which I don't feel you use all the time. This month is your time to shine.
Oh my God, it's me.
Everyone wants a positive message, don't they? I mean, you're not going to agree with a star sign if it says this week you've had some strange body odor that you just can't seem to get away. And did you know everyone notices it and they just don't want to tell you?
That's also me.
Oh God, that's me. No one wants the negatives, everyone wants the positives. And you can easily do it if you just go and sit at the back and watch a demonstration. Even though there's the potential for targeting and someone claiming mediumship and taking them forward for further experimentation, just a simple test is watching the one person they've targeted and just get a piece of paper and make a tally chart of positive and negatives. How many times they said something that the person confirmed against how many times something was overlooked. They didn't necessarily get a chance to say no, but the medium saw it wasn't drawing a positive, so they moved on. And yet they still said it anyway. I'm getting a David and a B might be Bill. Oh, Bill, right. Well, Bill said that. Hang on, who's David? Hang on, hang on, wait. Well, surely David wants to say something if it's come through to you. I mean, you've left David hanging here.
Basically just hung up on the guy.
Poor David.
They move too fast sometimes, and sometimes that catches out the sitter, that they're going so fast that they're trying to pay attention and pick out the thing that's the positive, and the negatives just get lost because there's too many to handle.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know years ago when I was there was one workshop that I was doing, and we were talking about that. We were talking about warm readings and hot readings and all sorts of things. And it was interesting. There was a couple of people that were there that had said, "Oh, I have to show you this recording of this psychic that I went to, because it was the best I've ever had. It was the best sitting I've ever had. It was so specific." And when you re-listen to it or you read the transcript of it, that's exactly what it was. There was really, they were all completely general statements, except the people really pulled that information and either read into it or were just interpreting it in that way. And my grandfather, before he passed away, his wife passed away first. And I remember him at one point bringing to me this great big transcript of all of these different readings and sittings that he had done with this medium out of Ontario. And, you know, he was bound to prove to me that this was the real deal, except he was one of those people that fell into that trap where the reading, there was nothing specific about it. And he had paid this psychic, I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars to go back and to go back and to go back. And it was, you know, and it was hard, but it was a moment where I had to say, like, you know, you really
this
need to
strikes
look at
me
this,
as
you don't have any money
though
left.
it's the same principle as the social engineering that hackers use to get people to send money because their grandson or somebody is in jail in a faraway country kind of thing. It seems exactly the same thing.
I was about to give another example there of all the different ones that they do. There's even ones where they'll go, we've hacked we've hacked your computer and we've been looking through your webcam at the certain things you've been looking at.
Yep.
Oh God.
And if you do not send us $10,000, then we'll be sending these pictures to your boss and stuff like that. Like, oh, right.
I think all in all, I mean, the you know, the role that these people have in our lives, and especially for people that are grieving and whatnot, it just goes to show how important the right people are to talk to.
Yeah. I mean, that's quite, I didn't know that about your grandfather. I mean, that's an interesting bit of writing for you to do there. There's some reflexivity to be had if you're going to write on the kind of the addiction side of mediumship. Because I think there's been a lot of really good and important stuff written recently on the positive sides of going to see mediums and how people see it as an alternative to bereavement counselling. There's obviously a hell of a lot of stuff in periodicals, magazines like the Skeptical Inquirer and other ones where, you know, people have debunked or they've looked at only the anomalistic psychological aspects of people claiming to be mediums. But what about the middle ground where there's maybe an honest medium going on in terms of, well, you know, there's nothing special coming from them, but they seem to be very honest and sincere and they're not interested in money. But there's the middle ground here. This person just won't quit. They've got this circumstance of grief and they just want to keep hearing anything. So at what point is enough? And what do we do with those individuals? How do we intervene as researchers, psychologists, parapsychologists, and try and help this person from this point on, especially with the medium's help, perhaps, because they might be also saying, like I gave the examples of, you don't need to see me anymore. It's like with Alex Tannerson, I edited the book Sign Psychotherapy, where he attended psychotherapy sessions with a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist on hand. These weren't for necessarily bereavement conditions, but they were various other things that people had, and he was there on their permission that he would lead the session as a psychic, that they weren't to say anything. He would just tell them about their past and what their issues were and why they were there today. And then it was led after that by the psychiatrist and the psychotherapist. I mean, this really wowed some of the individuals that he would know their lives in such detail. And there, I guess, there's that addictive pull to want to see Alex again, but that's not the condition he was working with. He wanted to use his abilities to initially help them and hand them into the capable hands of the psychotherapist and the psychiatrist who was there as well. So there was this really interesting trio where a medium could perhaps do the same, working in tandem with a counseling psychologist, a psychotherapist, a bereavement specialist, and saying, right, this is clearly a bad case of bereavement. Don't say anything, but these are the messages that I'm getting. This is the certain information. We've written it down now. Just tick any ones that are irrelevant to you and your personal loss. And if there's any questions you want me to ask them, or vice versa, no, go ahead now, and then leave it there, off into the hands of the counselling psychologist and the bereavement specialist. There's so many ways that you could experimentally start to look into that as an alternative therapy with traditional therapies and mix the two, where you can actually be testing the quality of the medium at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that.
Really
I
cool.
think, yeah, like because I think that's the spirituality side of grief counseling and bereavement. It's just so important. And I mean, for me, I mean, I've lost my best friend Steph years ago. She co-founded Entity Seeker with me. I lost my dad at a very early age. I have a number of friends. Like it's been something that is a continuous theme throughout my life. And I can't imagine not having that spiritual side of things to fall back on, honestly. Like I've had so many of experiences, and then experiences afterwards where I think I've been visited by them, or by the consciousness that was them. And it's a for me anyway, Mike, I don't know how you feel about this, but it's a way to redefine death and to redefine grief.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. Recently, it's weird, but I had my cat pass away, and Morgan and I have talked about this before. And it was 3-4 days afterward, and I could hear in my mind's eye. I knew it wasn't in the room, but I could hear my cat crying. But in a way, it wasn't like his "I'm terrified" cry. It was just like his, hey, I'm around. It was one of those kind of things. And I realized that although it was coming from somewhere inside me at the same time, it did exactly what we were talking about earlier. What you were talking about was it gave me hope that maybe my little kitty is somewhere and he's okay. And I don't know, what part of me created that experience or anything, or whether or not it was actually my cat reaching out to me. But at the same time, it was that experience that made it feel like it's okay to let him go.
There's a few papers in a mega journal of death and dying on pet loss, and I think specifically they were aiming more at cats and dogs. But I've met loads of people where they've lost a cat, and they said they've had consistent corner of the eye phenomena, where they've seen the cat walk past and they've looked and not seen anything directly. Or a lot of the times being in the kitchen and they've seen corner of the eye, it's jumped up on the kitchen counter as it did, and it's shocked them. They've suddenly, jumped backwards and looked directly at where they've seen the jump and they're not seen it. But had they stayed in the position that they did, they felt they would have, continued to see this cat roaming around in their peripheral vision. So everything from that corner of the eye phenomena, when you're clearly focusing on something else, but you've still got this kind of alarm system, this alert in your own psychology that a cat lives in this house, and it usually does this and that. So there might be that expectancy level, but usually the peripheral is alerting you to a potential danger or certain movement. So for example, sometimes we might be, say, sat on the couch in the living room, and you instantly turn to the left or right, and your eyes suddenly target the carpet, thinking it's a house spider, when actually it's just a bit of fluff off of someone's jacket, a bit of dark thread. But it's doing the right thing, though. It's alerting you to something that's shouldn't be on that cream carpet or light-colored carpet that suddenly stood out, and the peripheral has told you quickly, look over there. It could be a threat to you, that fast-moving spider or something like that. You're not necessarily be watching the telly expecting it to be there. So it's quite interesting in those instances with the cat that people have those. And there's a beautiful book by Raymond Bayless. It's out of print now, but it's still, you can find it on places like Abbey Books and eBay. They're still looking about, but it's simply called Animal Ghosts. And he'd looked at loads of instances of people having apparitions of cats, dogs, horses, and various other animals as well.
We've had, for my mom and I have had for a number of years in the family a cat that we nicknamed Horatio because it seemed to follow us from house to house. It was a traveler, but it was so interesting because he was a white cat, long legs. Like I could draw him. Like we'd seen him so many times and so clearly, and the guests, anybody that would come over to the house, the family house or whatever, would also see him and would also think that we had a cat, and we did not. It was, at one point we did have a cat, but this was not the cat that we had, and we have no idea to this day where he came from, who he was. But to the point where you would walk by a room and see him sitting in the doorway, and you would turn around because you thought a cat was in the house. And it was like exactly what you were saying. There was a lot of the out of the corner of your eye type thing, but there was a number of times as well where, you'd be sitting on the couch and watching television or something like that, and you'd see a tail and ears or just pieces of this cat kind of wandering through the living room. And it was just the neatest thing.
I love that with the guests. I mean, true spontaneity in any after-death communication or just the day-to-day spontaneous experiences, those really fascinate me. And it's interesting to hear that with other people reporting, an animal is not a human shape that they're pointing out. Are both of you familiar with Alan Gould?
Yes.
So, Alan Gould, he lives locally to me. He's at least in the city centre near enough of Nottingham, so a half-hour drive or so. I sometimes go to his house for tea with Dr. Matthew Coburn, who wrote a brilliant book called Pluralism in the Mind. But Alan Gould wrote The Founders of Psychical Research. He did a textbook on hypnotism. He did a book called Mediumship and Survival, which is an incredible piece of work. And when we go around to his house, he just chats about all kinds of things. Incredibly intelligent guy, former president of the SPR and journal editor and many other things. And he was based at the University of Nottingham for a long time. But I remember one of the last times we went round to his house, he told us an interesting one that he'd heard quite recently. And so this was in the past couple of years. And he said, oh, yeah, we had an insurance guy here recently because we had something. So he had to come around, take photos, make some notes. And he wandered around our house. And Alan has he has about 27 bookcases in his house to house the books that he does have in the house, let alone those in the garage. And the guy had been, I think, just casually glancing at the kinds of books that he got in there, probably not really understanding most of the titles. But once he'd done his surveying, he came back to Alan and he said, are you interested in ghosts and hauntings by any chance? And Alan, I guess, really underplaying it, said, yeah, I've got a vague interest. And he said, oh, you might be interested in this. A couple of weeks ago, I was out surveying another house. They'd had a burst water pipe upstairs and it damaged all the floorboards and the carpet. So I had to go up and do something similar. I had to take my photographs. I had to write a report and then speak to the owners and take it back to the insurance company. But anyway, it was a very large house like your own with a big grand staircase. And on the center part of the stairs where it then starts to turn left or right, there was enough space to have a chair right in the corner. And so I've been up the stairs and I was on the landing and I was doing the surveying and realized that I passed a lady sat in the chair on the stairs. And so I nodded to her and she smiled and nodded back and I got on with the surveying. And later on when I was done, I went back to the landing and she wasn't there anymore. So I went downstairs and spoke to the owner and said, I'm finished now and it's this, this and this. This is what we need to do. By the way, forgive me, I'm not sure how they're related to you, but was that your mother sat on the stairs? I had a friendly nod and smile to her, but she didn't say anything. And the guy said, apparently the guy's face just went white and the guy said to the insurance guy, oh, her. Please don't mention her. Don't talk about her. Just ignore her, please. And the guy thought, what on earth are you talking? What is that? You ignore your mother? And it transpired that the guy knew perfectly well what he was talking about. And he said, look, she's got nothing to do with me. She's not a relative. She's always been here since I moved in. She haunts the place. The more you talk about her, the more she ends up wandering about or sitting there. And I don't like it. Just please don't talk about her. And I just thought, wow, the fact that the guy was so blasé. Oh, her, please don't pay any attention to her. I love those. And so for the insurance guy, he was absolutely freaked because He'd not gone in there with any expectations. He was just doing his job, reacted to someone else inside the house, didn't see them later, so questioned it after the fact. And then everything starts to marry together. And there you have a very beautiful instance of someone who is clearly very sane and perfectly healthy, and they've had a very healthy hallucination of something that other people see as well.
Yeah.
So something that is not holding any physical presence, and comes and goes, but you can describe its physical form and features, and it seems to have some awareness of you, which is very interesting.
That's just, it's so cool. It's that kind of thing that just, makes you want to keep going with all of this.
Those ones do give you little rays of hope that, actually there's something to these experiences, because these people weren't primed like an after-death communication. They're not in a state of bereavement. They are just doing their day-to-day thing, and they end up in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the right state of mind.
Absolutely.
The right state of mind. Thank you so much for all of this. This is just amazing, and I'm sure everybody listening has learned a lot from this last 45 minutes. What are you up to? How can people find you? Tell the audience what you're doing next, and where they can find you.
Oh, I'm doing all sorts, really. I've probably got my foot in too many doors. We've literally just interviewed for a new PhD student working on the flotation tanks, where we're doing psi-based experiments with those, because we have a new flotation tank on campus that we can put together and then take down when we're done with it. I've got PhD students working on diet and psi and mediumship and COVID and lockdown scenarios and the incidence of apparitions within lockdown. A number of things. My own projects, I need to get out a second printing of Telephone Calls from the Dead, because it's been out of print for a number of years now, and I get asked daily for copies. I'm certainly not a businessman. I'm clearly a scientist who doesn't know how to make money. And I'm killing my own cash cow. So that needs to come out. I need to revise the whole thing as well. I'm steadily working on that. But I'm juggling other books. I'm trying to steadily put together a biography of D. Scott Rogo.
Excellent.
And the whole section on his murder is now spreading into 2 to 3 chapters. And that whole case now surrounding his murder is still being looked at, because there are things that we unearthed that realized that they weren't properly investigated at the time, to the extent that they could have been. So that's going on. I every year at Christmas time I get re-obsessed with Christmas ghosts, and I keep telling myself to write something, an actual small book on that. So
you absolutely should, and then you can come back here and talk about it.
Talk about Christmas ghosts. So I'll get around to that. Yeah, there's loads. I'm even sat next to right now my notebook, which is my notebook of book ideas. And so that's just full of potential titles for different things. And I've got research papers I'm working on here, there, and everywhere. Just had a paper come out on staring detection in the Australian Journal of Parapsychology. All sorts. I'm very, very active. But my website is all the W's, CallumECooper.com. And if you go on Amazon and just type in Callum E. Cooper, you'll usually find my author page and books on there. And also things might pop up on YouTube as well if you put my name in there. I've been on New Thinking Aloud. Some of my lectures have been recorded. So you'll find me under that name, or just as Cal Cooper. Both names seem to draw up things.
Well, and we'll repost links and share stuff, and it's what we do. So
wonderful. Also Twitter as well, by the same name, Callum E. Cooper. Follow me on Twitter.
I still can't. I'm still getting used to Twitter. I don't know what it is about Twitter. I'm getting there.
I don't tweet as much as I should. Probably
Me too.
one tweet a week. But I do realize that the more I tweet, the more people follow. So I do need to tweet a bit more.
Yeah, I know. We both need to work on. We'll work on that together. I'll retweet you if you retweet me.
Yeah, I'll tweet your tweets if you tweet my tweets.
Perfect.
Then we'll get tweeting. Yeah.
Thank
Get a
you,
room.
Cal, so much. Hey. Thank you, Cal, so much.
You're most welcome. It sounds like we've only just started.
I know. Well, it's because you got to come back. So
I will do.
Here's Morgan for this episode's segment of Spiritual Healthcare.
in this episode's edition of Spiritual Healthcare, the segment of the show where you get to be the creator and designer of your paranormal and spiritual experience, we're going to tell you about a process called building the momentum. A common problem that us humans run into is distraction, especially distraction from what is really making us happy. It seems like a contradiction, But many times, the things that make us the most excited can fall on the back burner to other things that take up our attention. We can water down the momentum of our things that we're manifesting by losing focus or believing things like, I have no time, or I found something else to do even though I really wanted to do that. This can be because we have a limitation in our beliefs that subjects are competing with one another, when in reality, the universe has the ability to flow every subject that is important to you in a way that will advance them. These beliefs can cause contradictory energy that propels us nowhere fast. This is often because we are not allowing enough momentum to build around the things that inspire us, and we lose the energetic momentum by watering it down with limited thought. Get out your journal or a piece of paper and begin to write down the why of the thing you really want to do. Start with one subject. Don't allow the how to bog down your thinking, and leave behind the logical constraints of, I don't have enough time. Just begin to let the why flow. Say things like, I want this because, or this makes me feel like. Let the thoughts around the thing you want build enough, and it is our promise to you, the inspiration and guidance on the how will come your way. You need nothing to be happy, but you need something to be sad. Remember, at the end of seeking, all is consciousness. Stay in peace, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Supernatural Circumstances, a co-production of Entity Seeker Paranormal Research and Teachings and Good Egg Studios. This podcast is part of the Curious Cast podcast network. Theme music by Corey Johnson of Catalyst Records in Edmonton, Alberta. You can find out more about Morgan Knudsen at entityseeker.ca and more about me and listen to my other show at darkpoutine.com. Feel free to email the show at supernaturalcircumstances@gmail.com. Good night for now.